Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri have just unleashed their most explosive accusations of the entire season after new FIA findings from Las Vegas revealed microscopic violations so precise that both drivers now believe their own team may have unknowingly sabotaged their race. The FIA inspection measured their skid blocks below the legal 9mm limit with values as low as 8.74 on Piastri's car and 8.88 on Norris's, and these readings were confirmed repeatedly using equipment precise to 1,000th of a millimeter. When the drivers discovered that both cars showed nearly identical illegal wear patterns, they confronted the engineering group demanding to know how such a small but catastrophic miscalculation slipped through preparations and erased every point they earned on track. And before we reveal every detail from that intense meeting inside the McLaren garage, make sure you subscribe right now, because the truth behind this Las Vegas disaster is only getting more explosive and the next revelations will shake the 2025 championship. The shock inside the McLaren garage began the moment the FIA delivered its post-race inspection report from Las Vegas showing that both Norris and Piastri had breached the 9mm plank rule. The FIA document explains that the floor of every Formula One car must retain a minimum thickness across the reference points beneath the chassis. When officials measured Piastri's plank, they recorded 8.96, 8.74 and 8.90, all values captured with an instrument certified to detect variations down to 1,000th of a millimeter. Because these numbers sat below the legal limit, the violation was immediate and indisputable. The tension intensified when the inspectors moved to Norris's car and discovered readings of 8.88 and 8.93. These values remained unchanged through repeated checks, confirming that both cars demonstrated the same pattern of excessive wear. The repetition of these figures eliminated any chance of procedural doubt. The FIA noted that identical failures on both cars meant the issue could not be blamed on a single curb strike or isolated accident. Instead, it pointed to a structural misjudgment in the team's pre-race setup. The implications of this were clear to everyone watching the inspection unfold. Inside the garage, both drivers struggled to understand how a weekend they executed with precision had collapsed because of a hidden technical detail under the car. Their races had been clean and calculated, with no major off-track moments and no incidents that would explain such aggressive plank wear. The FIA reminded McLaren that the regulation does not evaluate a driver's racecraft or the context of the conditions. It evaluates a number. If the measurement falls below 9mm at any of the reference points, the car is illegal. Norris and Piastri saw their results erased not because of performance but because of a rule that leaves no flexibility. The FIA then recalculated the championship standings, and this is when the full weight of the disqualification became clear. Norris lost 20 points from the podium he earned on track and dropped to 390 points. Piastri lost his entire score as well and fell back to 366. Verstappen, who avoided all issues, surged closer in the standings and matched Piastri's total. For the drivers, the reality was devastating. What should have been a decisive moment in their title push instead became the race that tightened the championship and exposed the team to enormous scrutiny. Engineers attempted to explain the contributing factors, emphasizing that practice sessions had been disrupted earlier in the weekend, preventing the team from collecting accurate data on suspension compression and ride height behavior. Without full long-run information, the engineering department had relied on partial estimates to set the car's baseline. But the FIA stressed that the regulation does not consider whether preparation was compromised or conditions were unpredictable. The only reference is the final number recorded beneath the chassis. This rigid application of the rule is what transformed a small measurement into a catastrophic result. When Norris and Piastri learned that the illegal readings on both cars aligned almost exactly, they realized that the problem was not random misfortune. It was an internal decision that left the floor with no safety margin in one of the most demanding circuits of the year. That detail is what ignited their anger. To them, it felt as if the team had unknowingly created a setup that sabotaged their own championship effort. The consequences were so severe and so preventable that the drivers viewed the error not as a mistake but as a collapse of preparation at the worst possible moment of the season. The true root of the problem became visible the moment McLaren read the FIA's detailed inspection sheet. The document confirmed that Norris's plank thickness had dropped to 8.88 and 8.93 millimeters, measurements far below the minimum requirement of 9 millimeters. These values were not approximations. They were measured with an instrument calibrated to detect differences as fine as 1,000th of a millimeter. Because the readings were repeated multiple times without any change, the FIA established absolute certainty that the car had operated outside the legal range. For a rule this strict, precision does not merely matter. It decides everything. The shock deepened when McLaren saw the numbers from Piastri's car. His plank produced readings of 8.96, 8.74 and 8.90. These figures mirrored Norris's values so closely that it became impossible to blame the failure on a unique event. This symmetry meant the issue was not caused by one car hitting a curb or suffering an unusual impact. It was the result of a setup configuration chosen before the race. When Norris and Piastri saw these numbers, they realized that both of their cars were destined to fail from the moment they rolled out of the garage. That realization is what fueled their anger. The drivers had completed the Las Vegas Grand Prix believing that everything had gone according to plan. They managed the tires through cold night temperatures, avoided heavy bottoming moments, and executed a controlled performance on a street circuit known for punishing errors. To finish a race so cleanly only to discover that the car was illegal because of a microscopic measurement was emotionally crushing. They were not undone by a strategic call or an on-track misjudgment. They were undone by a fraction of a millimeter hidden beneath the car. This disconnect between effort and outcome created a deep sense of frustration that resonated through the garage. The FIA document also revealed why the drivers felt the failure amounted to internal sabotage. The regulation governing plank thickness does not consider intent or circumstance. It evaluates the final value and nothing more. Even if the team lacked practice data, even if the track produced unusual compression forces, and even if the drivers executed their roles perfectly, the car must still meet the minimum 9mm requirement at the end of the race. The FIA repeated this principle multiple times within the ruling. Norris and Piastri understood immediately that their results were gone simply because the team had provided them with a setup that was mathematically destined to fail. The championship consequences intensified the emotional collapse. Norris was set to leave Las Vegas with a result that would have strengthened his position at the top of the standings. Instead, his total dropped to 390 points. Piastri suffered an identical fate, losing the points he had earned through a disciplined drive and falling back to 366. Verstappen, unaffected by the penalty, matched that total. This meant that a race McLaren believed would expand their advantage instead tightened the championship dramatically. For the drivers, watching the recalculated table made it clear that the cost of the engineering mistake would follow them for the remainder of the season. The final revelation came when engineers admitted that the wear pattern across both cars was almost perfectly matching. That single detail confirmed what the drivers feared most. McLaren had entered one of the most important races of the season with a setup that left no safety margin. The team had gambled on a ride height that was far too close to the regulatory limit, and the FIA's microscopic measurements exposed that decision with clinical precision. For Norris and Piastri, this felt like a structural failure of preparation. It was not intentional sabotage, but the consequences were so severe and so preventable that it felt indistinguishable from one. The engineering crisis that followed the Las Vegas inspection emerged from the precise numbers the FIA recorded beneath both McLaren cars. When Norris and Piastri saw their plank readings matched almost exactly, they understood the issue had not come from the chaos of racing but from a calculation made inside the garage. Norris's car registered 8.88 and 8.93 while Piastri's dropped even lower to 8.74 at its minimum. These figures proved the team underestimated how aggressively the floor would compress at full speed on the long Las Vegas straights. Engineers realized instantly that this was not a marginal misjudgment but a structural flaw in their baseline setup. As the team retraced their steps, they faced the reality that their lack of complete practice data left them without the usual foundation needed to confirm safe ride height margins. The FIA document highlights how measuring plank wear requires understanding exactly how the car behaves under race fuel, full speed, and night temperature conditions. Because several practice laps were lost to interruptions, McLaren had used estimates to determine how low the car could safely run. In modern Formula One, those estimates are not suggestions. They are risks. When the team set the car too close to the regulatory limit, they unknowingly placed both drivers into a scenario where the race result depended on millimeters they could not monitor during the Grand Prix. One of the factors the engineers highlighted to the drivers was the effect of the cold track on tire pressure. As temperatures fell, the tires compressed slightly, reducing the effective ride height of both cars. Over a full race distance, this reduction increased how often the plank made contact with the pavement. But the FIA made it clear that environmental factors do not protect a team from the rule. The FIA measured the plank at the end of the race, and the only thing that mattered was whether the thickness remained at or above 9mm. Because the reading sat below that threshold, the violation was absolute. This explanation did nothing to calm Norris or Piastri, who felt the team should have anticipated every variable. The engineering group also reviewed whether curb strikes or early race incidents could have accelerated the wear, but the symmetry between both cars eliminated that possibility. If the problem had been caused by contact, the readings would have shown irregular patterns. Instead, they showed uniform erosion across the reference positions. This uniformity revealed that the core issue was embedded in the setup philosophy itself. The drivers understood immediately that the car had been configured with almost no protective margin, meaning their championship depended on a perfect alignment of variables that never occurs in a race environment. This is why they interpreted the failure as self-inflicted.